The three-generation curse. Every empire begins with a dream, a vision that does not yet exist. Person who sees possibility where others see nothing. A builder who is willing to sacrifice today for a better tomorrow. A family that starts with struggle and creates prosperity. A company that begins with a simple idea and grows into something the world cannot ignore. At the beginning, greatness looks impossible. The founder stands alone. There is no guarantee, no certainty. No promise that the world will recognize their effort. There is only a decision to continue. History is filled with people who built what others believed could not be built. They started with limited resources but unlimited determination. They faced rejection. They faced failure. They faced moments when giving up would have been easier than continuing. But they endured, and slowly something extraordinary happened. A small idea became a powerful institution. A small business became an empire. A struggling family became wealthy. A weak nation became a dominant force. But history contains a mystery, a pattern that repeats across centuries. The same families that create enormous wealth often struggle to preserve it. The same companies that dominate industries sometimes disappear. The same civilizations that appear unstoppable eventually decline. The question is, why? Why does something that takes one lifetime to build sometimes disappear within a few generations? Why do people who inherit greatness sometimes fail to protect it? Why does success itself sometimes create the conditions for failure? A founder understands something that later generations may forget. They understand that success is fragile. They remember the days before the company existed, before the money, before the reputation, before the influence. They remember uncertainty. They remember sacrifice. They remember what it felt like to have nothing. But time changes everything. The next generation is born into a different world. They inherit the results of struggle without experiencing the struggle itself. They receive the benefits of sacrifice without feeling the pain that created those benefits. The story of hardship becomes a family story. The battle becomes history. The sacrifice becomes a memory. And slowly something dangerous can happen. The reward remains, but the mindset that created the reward begins to disappear. This pattern has been observed throughout human history. The historian Ibn Khaldun studied the rise and fall of civilizations more than 600 years ago. He noticed that powerful societies often begin with groups united by hardship. They possess discipline. They possess loyalty. They possess a shared purpose. But after success arrives, comfort changes human behavior. The descendants inherit power, but they may not inherit the qualities that created it. The Roman Empire provides one of history's greatest examples. Rome was not built by people who expected comfort. It was built by people who valued discipline, duty, and sacrifice. They created laws, roads, armies, and institutions that influenced the world for centuries. But eventually, maintaining greatness became harder than achieving greatness. The empire that conquered others struggled to control itself. China's dynasties reveal a similar pattern. A new dynasty rises from chaos. A strong leader restores order. The civilization grows wealthy and powerful. But generations later, corruption, complacency, and internal weakness begin to appear. A new force rises. The cycle begins again. The same pattern exists in the modern world. Companies rise. They dominate. They become symbols of success. Then the world changes. New technology appears. New competitors emerge. New generations of customers arrive. And organizations that once created the future sometimes become prisoners of the past. But this story is not only about collapse. It is also about survival. Because some families preserve their wealth. Some companies survive for centuries. Some ideas continue influencing humanity long after their creators are gone. The difference is not simply money. The difference is understanding. The greatest question of legacy is not, what did you inherit? The greatest question is, what are you capable of continuing? Because every generation receives two inheritances. The first is visible, money, property, companies, reputation, power. The second is invisible, discipline, wisdom, values, responsibility. The first inheritance can disappear. The second can rebuild everything. A person who inherits everything, but understands nothing can lose everything. But a person who understands the principles behind success can rebuild from nothing. The three-generation pattern is not a curse written in stone. It is a warning. It is a reminder that greatness is never permanently owned. It is temporarily protected. Every generation must prove itself. Every generation must choose. Will we simply consume what was built before us, or will we become worthy of carrying it forward? Because in the end, buildings become ruins. Fortunes change hands, empires disappear, but ideas, values, and principles can travel across centuries. They can move from one mind to another, from one generation to the next, from one person to millions. The greatest legacy is not what survives after you leave. The greatest legacy is what continues because you were here. This is the story of why great things disappear, and why some things become immortal. This is the three-generation curse. Chapter 1. The Founder Why Struggle Creates Great Empire. Before there is a company, before there is a family name recognized around the world, there is usually one person. A person standing at the beginning, a person with an idea, a person with uncertainty, a person willing to walk into a future that does not yet exist. The world often sees success only after it has been achieved. It sees the mansion, it sees the company headquarters, it sees the wealth, it sees the influence. But it rarely sees the years before success, the years of doubt, the years of rejection, the years when failure was more likely than victory. Every great achievement begins in an uncomfortable place. A place where there are more questions than answers. A place where there is no guarantee that the sacrifice will be rewarded. This is where founders are created, not in comfort, but in pressure. The first generation is different because they experience reality without protection. They cannot assume success will come. They cannot rely on a famous name. They cannot depend on an existing system. They must create the system. They must create the opportunity. They must create the future. The founder lives by a simple but difficult principle. If I do not build it, it will not exist. This mindset creates something powerful. A person who understands that survival depends on their own decisions develops a different relationship with responsibility. They become careful with resources. They learn from mistakes. They adapt quickly. They understand that every advantage must be earned. This does not mean every founder succeeds. History is filled with people who worked hard but failed. Effort alone does not guarantee greatness. Success requires many factors: timing, opportunity, knowledge, networks, skill, and sometimes luck. But behind many successful creations is a person who was willing to continue when others stopped. Andrew Carnegie. The Power of Self-Creation. The story of Andrew Carnegie represents one of history's greatest examples of the founder's journey. Born in Scotland in 1835, Carnegie experienced poverty during his childhood. His family moved to America searching for better opportunities. As a young man, he worked long hours in difficult conditions. But he developed something that would become one of his greatest advantages: a hunger for knowledge. While many people saw his circumstances as limitations, Carnegie saw them as challenges to overcome. He read, he learned, he studied the industries around him. He understood that the person who learns faster can create opportunities faster. Eventually, Carnegie became one of the most successful industrialists in American history. He built a steel empire that helped transform the United States. But the important lesson is not simply that Carnegie became wealthy. The deeper lesson is this: the person who creates the empire understands the price of the empire. A founder remembers every sacrifice, every risk, every moment when failure was possible. That memory becomes a source of discipline. The psychology of the builder. Why do some people create while others only consume? One important difference is their relationship with uncertainty. Most human beings naturally seek security. They prefer a predictable income, a stable environment, a clear path. But founders often choose uncertainty. They enter situations where failure is possible. They take risks without knowing the outcome. This does not mean founders are fearless. Many founders experience fear. The difference is that they act despite fear. They understand that uncertainty is not something to eliminate. It is something to manage. The philosopher Seneca wrote about the role of adversity in developing human character. The Stoics believed that challenges could strengthen people if they responded with wisdom. A person who faces difficulty develops abilities that comfort cannot teach. A person who has never faced resistance may never discover their own strength. A person who has faced challenges learns, I can survive, I can adapt, I can rebuild. John D. Rockefeller. Discipline hesitation. Another example of founder mentality is John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller built Standard Oil into one of the most powerful companies in the world. His success was not based only on ambition. It was built on systems. He focused on efficiency, organization, cost control, long-term planning. Rockefeller understood something important. Building wealth is not only about making money. It is about creating systems that continue producing value. This principle applies beyond business. A civilization is a system. A family is a system. A company is a system. The strongest builders do not only create achievements, they create structures that allow achievements to continue. The hidden cost of success, but the founder's greatest achievement creates a new challenge. The moment success is created, the next generation enters a different world. The founder remembers the empty land before the building. The successor sees the finished building. The founder remembers uncertainty. The successor experiences security. The founder knows success can disappear. The successor may assume success is permanent. This is where the first major danger of legacy begins. The results of struggle can be inherited, but the mindset created by struggle must be taught. A founder who transfers only wealth creates dependence. A founder who transfers knowledge, discipline, responsibility, values, creates continuity. The greatest gift a founder can give the next generation is not a comfortable life. It is the ability to create value. Because comfort without capability creates weakness, but capability creates freedom. The first law of legacy. Every great legacy begins with a person willing to do what others refuse to do. They sacrifice when others seek comfort. They continue when others quit. They build when others doubt. But the true measure of a founder is not only what they create. It is whether they create something that can survive without them. Because history's greatest tragedy is not that greatness is difficult to achieve. The greater tragedy is that greatness is often lost by people who never understood how difficult it was to create. The first generation creates the flame, but every future generation faces the same responsibility. Will they protect the flame, or will they allow it to disappear? Chapter 2: The Inheritance Problem. Why success creates a different battle for the next generation. The first generation faces the hardest battle. They must create something from nothing. They must fight uncertainty. They must overcome obstacles. They must prove that their vision is possible. But when success arrives, a new challenge appears. A challenge that is less visible but equally dangerous. The challenge of inheritance. The world often assumes that receiving success is easier than creating it. And in one sense it is. The person who inherits wealth does not need to struggle for the first opportunity. They inherit a name, a network, resources, education, connections, a foundation built by someone before them. These are incredible advantages, but every advantage creates a responsibility, because the person who inherits the result of success must answer a different question. The founder asks, how do I build something valuable? The successor asks, how do I remain valuable after receiving something valuable? These are two completely different battles. The founder fights against scarcity. The successor fights against comfort. The founder fears losing everything because they have experienced having nothing. The successor may struggle to understand loss because they have always been protected from it. This is the inheritance problem. The difference between knowing and experiencing. Human beings learn in two ways. They learn through information, and they learn through experience. Someone can tell a child, money is difficult to earn. The child may understand the sentence, but understanding the words is not the same as living the reality. The founder remembers the first rejection, the first failure, the first unpaid bill, the first moment when quitting seemed easier than continuing. The successor hears the story. The founder lived the story, and this creates a psychological gap between generations. The founder knows everything can disappear. The successor may think everything has always existed. The founder sees wealth as something fragile. The successor may see wealth as something permanent. This difference can determine whether a legacy survives. The psychology of comfort. Comfort is not the enemy. Human beings need stability. Families should provide security. Society should create prosperity. Companies should reward success. The problem begins when comfort removes the need for growth. A person who has never faced challenges may never develop confidence. Not confidence based on achievements, but confidence based on survival. The belief, I have faced difficulty before, and I can face difficulty again. This is why many successful families intentionally teach responsibility. They understand that protection without preparation can become weakness. The goal is not to make the next generation suffer. The goal is to make them capable. The Vanderbilt lesson. The story of Cornelius Vanderbilt shows the difference between creating wealth and preserving wealth. Vanderbilt was born in 1794. He entered the transportation industry when America was rapidly changing. Through strategy, competition, and relentless work, he built one of the largest fortunes in American history. He understood opportunity. He understood competition. He understood that industries change and that those who adapt survive. But the challenge after Vanderbilt was different. The question was no longer, can this family create wealth? The question became, can this family preserve the mindset that created wealth? Over time, the Vanderbilt name became strongly associated with luxury and social influence. The original business empire did not maintain the same dominance. The lesson is not that inheritance always fails. That would be incorrect. The lesson is deeper. The abilities that create wealth must be deliberately transferred, because wealth itself cannot transfer them automatically. In visible inheritance, every generation receives two inheritances. The first is visible, money, property, businesses, asset. The second is invisible, discipline, knowledge, values, character, judgment. The visible inheritance can be spent. The invisible inheritance creates more. A person can lose money and rebuild if they possess the mindset that created money. But a person who inherits money without that mindset may eventually lose both. Ibn Khaldun's warning centuries ago. Ibn Khaldun observed a similar pattern among ruling families and civilizations. The first generation often experiences struggle. They develop strength through necessity. The next generation enjoys stability. The later generation becomes attached to comfort. The problem is not wealth. The problem is forgetting the responsibility that comes with wealth. Successors' responsibility. The second generation often receives unfair criticism. They are not automatically weaker. They simply face a different challenge. The founder must create. The successor must preserve and improve. Preservation requires its own form of greatness. It requires humility, patience, learning, adaptation, the ability to respect the past without becoming trapped by it. The best successors do not simply protect what they inherited. They expand it. They add their own contribution. They become builders in their own way. The question every heir must answer, every person who inherits something valuable eventually faces the same question. Am I a consumer of this legacy, or a guardian of this legacy? A consumer asks, what can I take from this? A guardian asks, what responsibility comes with this? History remembers both types of people. Some inherited greatness and allowed it to disappear. Others inherited greatness and made it stronger. The difference was not what they received. The difference was what they became. Because true inheritance is not receiving the results of another person's work. True inheritance is receiving the responsibility to continue that work. The founder creates the foundation. The successor decides whether the foundation becomes a building or becomes a forgotten ruin. Chapter 3. Ibn Khaldun and the Hidden Law of Civilization. Why societies rise through unity and decline through comfort. More than 600 years ago, during a time of political chaos and constant conflict, a historian in North Africa attempted to answer one of the greatest questions in human history. Why do civilizations rise? Why do powerful societies eventually decline? Why does a group of people who were once weak become powerful enough to defeat stronger opponents? And why do those same powerful societies sometimes lose the qualities that made them successful? His name was Ibn Khaldun. He was not simply recording the events of history. He was searching for the hidden patterns behind history. He wanted to understand the invisible forces that move societies. His ideas became one of the earliest attempts to study civilization scientifically. Long before modern sociology, economics, and political science existed, Ibn Khaldun recognized something profound. The rise and fall of civilizations is connected to human behavior. The force that builds civilizations. Ibn Khaldun identified a powerful force that he called asabiya. This word is often translated as social cohesion, groups, solidarity, collective strength, but its meaning goes deeper. It describes the bond that connects people when they share a common purpose, a common struggle, a common identity. A group with strong asabiya does not simply fight together. They trust each other. They sacrifice for each other. They believe their future depends on their cooperation. This explains one of history's great mysteries. How can a smaller, poorer group defeat a richer, stronger society? Because strength is not only measured by resources, it is measured by unity. A wealthy society without unity can become weak. A struggling society with strong bonds can become powerful. The people of struggle. According to Ibn Khaldun, powerful groups often begin in difficult conditions. They experience hardship, competition, danger, uncertainty. These conditions force people to develop qualities necessary for survival. They become disciplined, resourceful, courageous, connected. This is similar to the founder of a company. The founder begins without guarantees. They depend on their own decisions. They cannot assume success. They must create it. The first generation does not ask, how can we protect our comfort? They ask, how can we survive? And survival creates strength. The second stage, the age of building. After struggle comes success. The group gains power. It creates institutions. It establishes order. It builds wealth. This is the golden period. The society becomes stronger, cities grow, trade expands, knowledge increases. The achievements of previous generations create better living conditions. But success creates a new challenge. The environment changes. The people who created the system are replaced by people born inside the system. The first generation remembers the problem. The next generation manages the solution. The age of comfort. Ibn Khaldun observed that later generations often become attached to the comforts created by their ancestors. They enjoy luxury, security, status, power, but something begins to weaken. The original urgency disappears. The shared struggle disappears. The unity that created success begins to decline. The society may still appear powerful. Its buildings may still be impressive. Its wealth may still be enormous. But internally, its foundation becomes weaker. This is the danger of inherited success. People inherit the results, but they do not always inherit the reasons those results existed. The cycle of civilization. Ibn Khaldun's ideas can be summarized as a cycle. A struggling group rises. It creates order. It achieves prosperity. It becomes comfortable. It loses unity. A new group rises. The cycle begins again. This pattern has appeared throughout history. Different countries, different cultures, different centuries, but similar human behavior. The connection to modern companies. Although Ibn Khaldun studied civilizations, his ideas apply to modern organizations. A small company begins with hunger. The founders work with urgency. They take risks. They listen to customers. They solve problems. Then success arrives. The company grows. More employees join. More systems develop. More layers of management appear. Eventually, the company may become more focused on protecting what it already has than creating what comes next. The challenger becomes the defender. The innovator becomes the guardian of old methods. This is why some young companies defeat established giants. They possess what successful organizations sometimes lose: urgency. The lesson of history. The lesson is not that success is bad. Success is necessary. Civilizations need prosperity. Families need wealth. Companies need growth. The danger is forgetting the qualities that created success. A civilization must continue asking, are we still learning? Are we still adapting? Are we still united? Are we still willing to improve? Because the moment a society believes it has nothing left to learn, it begins its decline. The great warning of Ibn Khaldun. The most powerful lesson from Ibn Khaldun is this: the achievements of the past cannot protect a society that loses the character of the present. A family cannot survive because its ancestors were disciplined. A company cannot survive because its founders were brilliant. A nation cannot survive because its history was glorious. Every generation must renew the strength that created greatness. Because greatness is not inherited permanently, it is inherited temporarily. And every generation must decide whether it will protect the flame or allow it to disappear. Chapter 4: Rome, the empire that conquered the world but lost itself. How success, wealth, and power created the conditions for decline. In the beginning, Rome was not an empire. It was a small city surrounded by powerful enemies. Its survival was uncertain. Its future was unknown. The people of Rome did not inherit greatness. They had to create it. For centuries, Rome fought. It expanded. It adapted. It built one of the most powerful civilizations the world had ever seen. At its height, Rome controlled territories stretching across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Its roads connected continents. Its laws influenced future nations. Its engineering transformed the ancient world. Rome became the symbol of power. But hidden inside its success was a question that every great civilization eventually faces. Can the qualities that create greatness survive after greatness is achieved? The early Romans valued a concept called virtus. Virtus represented courage. Discipline, duty, self-control, responsibility. The ideal Roman citizen was not defined only by what they possessed. They were defined by what they contributed. They believed personal desires had to serve something greater: the family, the community, the republic. The Roman historian Livy recorded stories of Rome's early heroes and emphasized values such as sacrifice and duty. Whether every story was perfectly historical or not, these stories reveal what Romans admired: a citizen who placed responsibility above comfort. The secret of Rome's rise. Rome's greatest strength was not only its army. Many civilizations had armies. Rome's advantage was organization. Rome created a legal system, a disciplined military, efficient administration, engineering networks, political institutions. Rome understood something important: great achievements cannot depend on one person. They require systems. This is the first lesson of Rome. Individuals can create moments of greatness. Institutions create lasting power. When victory changes people, but Rome's success created a new challenge. The empire expanded. New territories were conquered. Wealth flowed into Rome. The city became richer, more powerful, more luxurious. And slowly the environment that created Roman strength began to change. The early Roman asked, "How do we protect Rome?" The later Roman elite increasingly asked, "How do I gain more influence inside Rome?" The focus shifted from service to competition for power. The cost of success. Every successful organization faces this danger. At the beginning, failure is close. People are alert. People cooperate. Everyone understands the mission. But after success arrives, priorities can change. People begin protecting their position, their wealth, their status. The question changes from "how do we become better?" to "how do we preserve what we already have?" This transformation can weaken even the strongest systems. The problem of leadership. Rome eventually faced serious political instability. The empire experienced civil wars, power struggles, assassinations, conflicts over succession. A dangerous pattern developed. The empire became increasingly dependent on individual leaders. A strong institution should survive a weak leader. But when institutions weaken, every leader becomes a potential crisis. The question was no longer only, who is the emperor? The deeper question became, can the system survive the emperor? The changing Roman military. Rome's military was one of history's greatest achievements. But even military success created new challenges. The early Roman army was closely connected to citizenship. Soldiers fought as members of the republic. Over time, the military became more professional and increasingly connected to powerful generals. This created a dangerous possibility. A soldier's loyalty could shift from the state to the individual commander. When personal loyalty becomes stronger than institutional loyalty, societies become vulnerable. Economic pressures. Rome also faced economic challenges. Historians debate the exact causes, but several problems placed pressure on the empire: increasing costs of administration, economic inequality, currency problems, difficulty managing an enormous territory. A large empire requires constant maintenance. Expansion can create strength, but expansion also creates responsibility. The fall of Western Rome. Rome did not collapse overnight. The decline was gradual. The Western Roman Empire weakened over centuries. In 476 AD, the traditional date used by historians, the Germanic leader Odoacer removed the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus. But Rome did not truly disappear. Its influence continued through law, language, architecture, political ideas, culture. The physical empire declined. The legacy survived. The true lesson of Rome's story is not simply great civilizations become weak. The deeper lesson is success creates new problems that require new solutions. The same qualities that built Rome, discipline, organization, military strength, ambition, had to be constantly renewed. But when a civilization inherits power without renewing the mindset behind that power, decline begins. The question Rome leaves use. Every empire, every company, every family eventually faces the same question. Can we remain disciplined after becoming comfortable? Because the greatest threat is not always outside the walls. Sometimes the greatest threat is the loss of character inside the walls. Rome teaches humanity a timeless lesson. An empire does not fall when it loses its wealth. It falls when it loses the qualities that created its wealth. Chapter 5: China, The dynastical and the mandative, and why thousands of years of history reveal the same pattern of rise, prosperity, decline, and renewal. For thousands of years, China has been one of the world's greatest civilizations. Its history stretches across countless generations. Dynasties rose, dynasties fell, new rulers replaced old rulers. But beneath all the changes, Chinese historians noticed something remarkable. A pattern, a cycle, a repeated story of human ambition, success, comfort, decline, and renewal. The question was, why does a powerful dynasty eventually lose its strength? Why does a government that once restored order later become associated with corruption? Why do leaders who inherit greatness sometimes fail to preserve it? Ancient Chinese thinkers developed one of history's most influential explanations: the mandate of heaven. The mandate of heaven. The mandate of heaven was the idea that a ruler's authority was not permanent. A ruler did not govern simply because they inherited power. They had to prove they deserved it. A legitimate ruler was expected to provide order, justice, stability, protection, prosperity. But if a ruler became corrupt, cruel, disconnected, unable to solve problems, then they were believed to have lost the mandate of heaven. This created a powerful political idea. Power is not only inherited, power must be continually earned. Many Chinese dynasties began during periods of disorder. A society experiences war, chaos, economic hardship, political instability. Then a new leader appears, someone who promises restoration, someone who understands suffering, someone who understands what people need. The founder does not begin with comfort. They begin with a problem to solve. They rebuild government systems, agriculture, military strength, social order. Like a business founder, they create structure where there was previously uncertainty. The golden after stability comes prosperity. The dynasty grows, trade expands, culture flourishes, technology advances. The society enters a golden period. This is the moment when success becomes visible. The next generation grows up surrounded by achievements created by previous generations. They inherit the institutions, the wealth, the reputation, the stability, but they do not always inherit the struggle. The Tang dynasty. The height of culture and power. The Tang dynasty is often remembered as one of China's greatest eras. During the Tang period, trade expanded across Asia. Art and literature flourished. The capital, Chang'an, became one of the world's largest and most diverse cities. The dynasty represented confidence and achievement, but greatness also creates complexity. Over time, challenges appeared: political struggles, regional military power, internal conflicts. The same size and complexity that showed Tang's strength also made it harder to manage. Greatness and vulnerability. The Ming dynasty provides another powerful example. The Ming built remarkable achievements. They created the Forbidden City, strong administrative systems, major cultural developments. China was wealthy and sophisticated, but later generations faced corruption, financial pressure, political struggles, social unrest. Eventually, internal weakness combined with external pressure. In 1644, the Ming dynasty collapsed and was replaced by the Qing dynasty. Ovidline Chinese history reveals a recurring pattern. A dynasty rises because leaders solve problems. It becomes powerful because institutions work. It declines when institutions weaken. The pattern can be summarized. A difficult beginning creates strong leaders. Strong leaders create stability. Stability creates prosperity. Prosperity creates comfort. Comfort can create weakness. Weakness creates opportunity for replacement. This is not unique to China. It is a human pattern. Confucius and the Impotence of Character. The influence of Confucius shaped Chinese thinking about leadership for centuries. Confucius believed that society begins with human character. A nation cannot be strong if its leaders lack virtue. He emphasized education, responsibility, respect, self-discipline, moral development. His message was simple: a society's future depends on the quality of its people. The lesson for modern legacies: the dynastic cycle applies beyond governments. It applies to Tao, families, companies, organizations, institutions. A founder creates a culture. A successor manages the culture. Later generations may inherit the culture without understanding why it existed. They preserve the traditions, but they forget the purpose. And when purpose disappears, decline begins. The power of renewal. The lesson of Chinese history is not that decline is unavoidable. It is that renewal is necessary. A dynasty survives by adapting. A company survives by innovating. A family survives by teaching responsibility. Every generation must ask, are we still serving a purpose? Are we still solving problems? Are we still worthy of trust? Final lesson: the mandate of heaven represents one of history's deepest ideas. No person, family, company, or civilization has a permanent right to greatness. Greatness must be renewed. You cannot live forever on the achievements of your ancestors. You cannot maintain power simply because you once earned it. History does not reward what you inherited. History rewards what you do with what you inherited. A dynasty falls when it believes its position is guaranteed. A legacy survives when every generation understands it must continue earning its place. Chapter 6: Family Fortunes. Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, and the hidden difference between wealth and wisdom. A person can spend an entire lifetime building a fortune. Years of sacrifice, years of difficult decisions, years of taking risks when failure was possible. Then, after decades of work, they finally achieve what many people dream about: security, influence, wealth. But history reveals a surprising truth. Creating wealth and preserving wealth are two different challenges. Many people know how to build. Fewer know how to protect. A fortune is not only a collection of money, it is the result of discipline, decision-making, patience, risk management, the ability to delay immediate pleasure for future rewards. But when wealth is transferred to another generation, something important can be lost. The money moves, but the mindset may not. The difference between the builder and the heir, the founder, experiences the cost. The heir experiences the benefit. The founder remembers the first investment, the first failure, the first difficult decision, the moments when everything could have collapsed. The heir may know those stories, but knowing a story is not the same as living it. The founder thinks, I must protect this because I know how difficult it was to create. The heir may think, this has always existed. This difference can determine the future of a family legacy. The Vanderbilt story. Building one of America's greatest fortunes, the story of Cornelius Vanderbilt represents one of history's greatest examples of first-generation success. Born in 1794, Vanderbilt entered the transportation industry at a young age. He began with limited resources, but he possessed qualities common among great builders: ambition, strategic thinking, persistence, a willingness to compete. During the 19th century, transportation was transforming America. Vanderbilt recognized opportunity. He built success first in shipping and later expanded into railroads. By the end of his life, he had created one of the largest fortunes in American history. But his greatest achievement was not simply accumulating wealth. It was his ability to recognize change and act before others. He understood a principle every founder understands. The world rewards those who adapt. The challenge after success, but after the founder's victory comes another battle. The battle of preservation. The next generation does not face the same environment. They do not need to build from zero. They inherit the name, the resources, the opportunities. But they must answer a different question. Can they develop the abilities needed to protect what they received? The Vanderbilt story is often remembered because later generations became associated with wealth and social status rather than the same level of business dominance. The lesson is not, children of successful people always fail. That would be false. Many heirs create great achievements. The deeper lesson is, a fortune built through discipline cannot survive without disciplined people. The Rockefeller difference: turning wealth into something greater. The story of John D. Rockefeller provides a different example. Rockefeller created one of the greatest fortunes in history through Standard Oil. He became one of the richest people in modern history. But the Rockefeller legacy continued because wealth was transformed into institutions and long-term influence. The family invested in education, science, medicine, philanthropy. The lesson is powerful. Money consumed disappears. Money converted into institutions can continue creating value. A successful person asks, how much can I accumulate? A great legacy asks, how much value can continue after I am gone? Morgan Housel and the Invisible Nature of Wealth. Writer Morgan Housel explains that wealth is often invisible. People usually see expensive houses, luxury vehicles, public displays of success. But true wealth often exists in things people cannot see: savings, patience, financial discipline, long-term thinking. A person can look wealthy while being financially fragile. Another person can appear ordinary while quietly building lasting security. The difference is not appearance. The difference is behavior. The psychology of consumption. Inherited wealth creates a unique danger. When people receive abundance without understanding scarcity, they may confuse wealth with consumption. They think, I have money, therefore I am successful. But wealth is not only what you spend. Wealth is what gives you choices. Wealth is the ability to survive uncertainty. Wealth is freedom. The 5 things great families transfer. Families that survive for generations transfer more than assets. They transfer 1. A story. They remember where they came from. They remember sacrifice. 2. Responsibility. They teach. This is not only something to enjoy, it is something to protect. 3. Skills. A family name cannot replace ability. Future generations must become capable. 4. Humility. Success should create gratitude, not superiority. Purpose. The strongest families understand that wealth should create value beyond themselves. The true meaning of inheritance. Inheritance is often misunderstood. People think inheritance means receiving something. But true inheritance means receiving responsibility. A person who inherits money but loses discipline may eventually lose the money. A person who inherits discipline can recreate wealth even after losing everything. The greatest gift a founder can leave is not a bank account. It is a way of thinking. Final lesson. Every family fortune eventually faces the same question. Will future generations become consumers of wealth or creators of value? Because money can be transferred in a document, but wisdom must be transferred through example. A fortune is built by one generation, but a legacy is built by every generation that follows. Chapter 7. Companies that forgot their origins. Kodak, Nokia, Blockbuster, and why success can become a trap. When people think about collapse, they often imagine weakness. They imagine a small organization being defeated by a stronger one. They imagine a poor nation being conquered by a powerful enemy. They imagine a failing company being replaced by a better competitor. But history reveals something more surprising. Some of the greatest failures happen not to the weak, but to the successful. The companies that disappear are often not companies that lacked intelligence. They are companies that once had everything: resources, talent, customers, money, experience. The problem was not that they did not know how to succeed. The problem was that their previous success created a new danger. They became attached to the very things that made them successful. The success trap. Every great company begins with a challenger mindset. In the beginning, a company asks, how can we solve this problem? How can we serve customers better? How can we defeat competitors? How can we improve? But after success arrives, the questions can change. The company begins asking, how do we protect our market? How do we defend our position? How do we avoid losing what we built? This transformation is dangerous because the company stops behaving like a creator. It begins behaving like a protector. The founder's mindset is, we must create the future. The established company's mindset can become, we must preserve the past, and sometimes preserving the past destroys the future. Kodak, the company that saw the future but could not embrace it. Few examples demonstrate this better than Kodak. For much of the 20th century, Kodak was one of the most powerful brands in photography. The name Kodak represented memories. Families trusted Kodak to capture important moments. But history gives us an unexpected fact. Kodak was involved in the creation of digital photography technology. In 1975, Kodak engineer Stephen Sasson developed an early digital camera. The company had talented people. The company had the technology. The company understood the future was changing. So why did Kodak struggle? Because the future threatened the business model that had made Kodak successful. Film photography created enormous profits. Digital photography threatened that foundation. The challenge was not, do we know what is coming? The challenge was, are we willing to destroy part of our current success to create future success? This is one of the hardest decisions any successful organization faces. The Kodak lesson. The lesson is not that Kodak was foolish. The lesson is more human. Sometimes success creates attachment. People become emotionally connected to what made them successful. But the world continues moving. The question every successful organization must ask is, If we were starting today, would we build the same thing? If the answer is no, change becomes necessary. When the leader stops adapting, another example is Nokia. At its peak, Nokia was the dominant force in mobile phones. Millions of people around the world used Nokia devices. The company represented reliability, quality, but the mobile industry changed. The smartphone revolution transformed what people expected from a phone. A phone was no longer only a device for calling. It became a computer, a camera, a source of entertainment, a platform for applications. The industry was changing from hardware competition to ecosystem competition. Nokia had talented engineers, it had resources, it had a powerful brand. But adapting quickly enough became difficult. The Nokia lesson being number one can create a dangerous illusion. The belief, we are successful because we understand everything. But leadership requires humility. The moment a company stops listening, it begins losing connection with reality. The market does not reward past achievements, it rewards current value. Protecting yesterday's world, the story of Blockbuster shows another form of decline. At its peak, Blockbuster dominated video rental. Its stores were everywhere, its brand was powerful, its business model worked. Then technology changed entertainment. The internet created a new possibility, watching movies without visiting a physical store. Streaming represented a completely different future. The challenge for Blockbuster was not understanding that change existed. The challenge was accepting that the old model might need to disappear. A successful company often faces a painful choice. Destroy what made you successful before someone else destroys you with something better. Patent behind Facer Kodak, Nokia, Blockbuster. Different industries, different decade, similar pattern. They were not destroyed because they lacked intelligence. They were challenged because the world changed faster than their ability to adapt. This is the same pattern seen in empires and families. A system becomes successful. Success creates comfort. Comfort reduces urgency. Reduced urgency creates vulnerability. Peter Drucker's warning management thinker Peter Drucker emphasized that organizations must constantly ask, what business are we really in? A company that only protects today's product may miss tomorrow's opportunity. A company that understands its deeper purpose can adapt. Kodak was not really a film company, it was a memory company. Nokia was not really a phone company, it was a communication company. Blockbuster was not really a video rental company, it was an entertainment company. Understanding the deeper mission allows adaptation. The lesson for every legacy: families, companies, nations, all face the same danger, confusing the method with the mission. Methods change, technology changes, markets change, people change, but purpose must continue. The greatest organizations do not ask, how do we protect what we have? They ask, how do we continue creating value? Final lesson: success is not a permanent possession. It is a responsibility. The moment an organization believes it has already won, it becomes vulnerable. Because history teaches us, the greatest enemy of success is not failure. The greatest enemy of success is refusing to change. Chapter 8. The Psychology: How Ego, Comfort, and Overconfidence Destroy Greatness from Within. When great empires collapse, people usually search for an enemy. They look for the army that invaded, the competitor that appeared, the crisis that arrived, the mistake that was made. But history reveals something deeper. Many great failures begin long before the final collapse. They begin inside the human mind. A civilization can have resources, a company can have talented employees, a family can have wealth, a leader can have power. Yet all of these advantages become useless if the people controlling them lose the ability to see reality clearly. The greatest danger is often not losing power. It is believing that power makes you incapable of losing. Success changes the way people think before success. People are often careful. They ask, what am I missing? What can I improve? Who can teach me? What mistakes should I avoid? But after success arrives, something can change. The questions become, why should I change? Why should I listen? Why would I be wrong? The person who once searched for answers begins believing they already have them. This is where decline begins. The danger of overconfidence. Psychologist and Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman studied how human beings make decisions. One of the important lessons from his work is that people often have more confidence in their judgments than reality justifies. Success can strengthen this tendency. A person thinks my decisions created my success. Sometimes that is true, but success is rarely created by one factor alone. It is usually a combination of skill, opportunity, timing, circumstances, other people's contributions. When successful people forget this, confidence can become arrogance. Confidence versus ego. Confidence says, I believe I can solve this problem. Ego says, I cannot be wrong. Confidence allows growth. Ego blocks growth. A confident leader welcomes information. An ego-driven leader rejects information that challenges their beliefs. This difference can determine the survival of a company, a family, a nation. The Emperor's New Clothes. One of the oldest stories about power is the tale of the emperor who surrounded himself with people afraid to tell him the truth. Everyone saw the problem. Nobody wanted to speak. This pattern appears throughout history. Power can create isolation. The more powerful a person becomes, the more difficult it may become to receive honest criticism. People around powerful individuals may tell them, you are right, you are brilliant, you cannot fail. Eventually, the leader begins living inside an illusion. Julius Caesar. The danger of concentrated power. Julius Caesar remains one of history's most fascinating figures. He was a brilliant military commander, a skilled politician, a master strategist. His victories transformed Rome. But his growing influence created fear among those who believed Rome's political system was being threatened by too much power concentrated in one person. In 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated by members of the Roman Senate. The lesson is not simply about Caesar, it is about systems. A healthy system must be strong enough to challenge even powerful individuals. When a system depends entirely on one person, it becomes fragile. Napoleon. Victory creates blindness. Napoleon Bonaparte represents another powerful lesson. Napoleon was one of history's greatest military minds. He achieved victories that changed Europe, but success created a dangerous psychological effect. Previous victories increased confidence. Confidence became certainty. Certainty reduced caution. His invasion of Russia in 1812 became a devastating failure. The same person who had achieved extraordinary victories made a decision that revealed the limits of his judgment. The lesson: past success does not guarantee future success. The comfort problem decline does not always begin with arrogance. Sometimes it begins with comfort. A person who struggles develops urgency. A person who is protected may not experience the same need to improve. This applies to families, companies, civilizations. The founder thinks, we must survive. The successor thinks, we are successful. These are different psychological environments. Carl Jung and the inherent identity psychologist Carl Jung explored the importance of self-awareness and personal development. One danger of inherited success is living through an identity created by others. A person may think, my family is powerful, my company is unbeatable, my society is superior. But inherited identity can become a trap. A person stops asking, who am I becoming, because they believe I already know who I am. Growth stops when self-examination stops. The importance of humility. Humility is not weakness. Humility is the ability to recognize I can still learn, I can still improve, I can still be wrong. The strongest leaders create environments where people can challenge them. They surround themselves with people who provide honest feedback. The weakest leaders create environments where everyone agrees. The pattern is often: success creates confidence. Confidence creates comfort. Comfort creates reduced urgency. Reduced urgency creates vulnerability. Vulnerability creates decline. The solution is not avoiding success. The solution is remaining worthy of success. Final lesson: greatness rarely disappears because people suddenly become incapable. It disappears because people stop questioning themselves. They stop learning. They stop adapting. They stop listening. The most dangerous sentence in history is, we have always done it this way, because the world does not reward what you achieved yesterday. It rewards what you can create today. The greatest enemy of greatness is not failure. It is the belief that you no longer need to improve. Chapter 9. The Survivors. Why some legacies last for centuries, while others disappear. If decline were inevitable, this story would end here. Every fortune would eventually disappear. Every company would eventually collapse. Every institution would eventually become a ruin. And every generation would simply wait for time to destroy what the previous generation created. But history gives us another story. Some survive. Some families preserve wealth and purpose across generations. Some organizations survive wars, depressions, technological revolutions, political upheavals, and the deaths of their founders. Some institutions become stronger with age, which means the three-generation curse is not really a curse. It is a test, and some pass it. The question is, what do the survivors understand that everyone else forgets? The answer begins with a distinction. Weak legacies preserve possessions. Strong legacies preserve the ability to create. The founder must eventually become unnecessary. There is a strange paradox at the heart of leadership. The founder spends years making themselves indispensable. They make the decisions. They understand the customers. They hold the relationships. They solve the emergencies. They know where everything came from and why everything works. At the beginning, this can be an advantage. But eventually it becomes dangerous, because if an organization cannot function without its founder, then the founder has created success, but not succession. This is where many legacies die. The founder becomes the institution. The family depends on one patriarch. The company depends on one visionary. The political movement depends on one leader. And everyone becomes accustomed to asking the same question. What does the founder think? But eventually, the founder disappears. Every founder does. And suddenly the organization discovers that what appeared to be strength was actually dependency. A lasting legacy, therefore, requires something psychologically difficult. The founder must deliberately reduce their own importance. They must transfer knowledge, delegate authority, develop successors, allow other people to make decisions, and sometimes watch those people make mistakes. That can be painful, but without it, there is no real succession. The greatest leader is not the person nobody can replace. The greatest leader builds something that continues after replacement becomes inevitable. Toyota. When a Pacify B5 comes more important than a person, consider Toyota. Its story began with the Toyota family, but its endurance cannot be explained simply by one family name. Over time, Toyota developed an organizational philosophy built around principles such as continuous improvement and respect for people. One concept became particularly famous: Kaizen, continuous improvement. The principle sounds simple, but psychologically, it is revolutionary. Because Kaizen begins with an uncomfortable assumption: what we are doing today can still be improved. Even when the company is successful, even when customers are satisfied, even when competitors are behind, there is still something to learn. Compare this mindset with the psychology of decline. Declining organizations say, we are successful, why change? Learning organizations say, we are successful, what are we still missing? One protects ego, the other protects adaptability. Toyota also became famous for treating problems differently. In a weak culture, problems are embarrassing. People hide mistakes because mistakes threaten status. But in a learning culture, a problem is information. Something went wrong. Why? What process allowed it? How can the system improve? That difference is enormous. Because organizations that hide problems accumulate weakness. Organizations that expose problems create opportunities for correction. This gives us the first survival principle: never become too successful to admit that something is wrong. The difference between values and methods. There is another secret behind long-lived institutions. They understand the difference between values and methods. Values should often remain stable. Methods must often change. Confusing the two is dangerous. Imagine a family business that has produced the same product for 100 years. Its values may be quality, trust, craftsmanship, service. Those principles can survive, but the technology used to deliver them may need to change completely. The customer may change. The distribution system may change. The market may change. The product itself may need to change. If the family says, our ancestors did it this way, therefore we must do it this way forever, tradition becomes stagnation. But if they say, our ancestors believed in quality, how do we deliver quality in this generation? Tradition becomes a foundation for innovation. This distinction is one of the deepest lessons of legacy. Preserve the principle, adapt the method. The Japanese longevity question. Japan provides fascinating examples of businesses that have survived for extraordinary periods. Some have operated across many generations. They survive changing rulers, industrialization, wars, economic crises, technological revolutions. How? There is no single explanation, but recurring characteristics include long-term thinking, reputation, craftsmanship, careful succession, adaptability, and a willingness to think beyond the lifetime of one individual. This changes decision-making. If you are building only for yourself, the question is, what benefits me today? If you are building for people you will never meet, the question becomes, what will still matter after I am gone? Those two questions produce very different organizations. The power of stirrup. This brings us to one of the most important ideas in this entire documentary. Stewardship. Ownership says this belongs to me. Stewardship says this has been entrusted to me. Ownership asks, what can I get from it? Stewardship asks, what condition should I leave it in? That psychological difference can determine whether a legacy survives. A third-generation heir who thinks like an owner may consume. A third-generation heir who thinks like a steward may build. They may possess exactly the same inheritance. The difference is identity. One sees wealth as a reward. The other sees wealth as responsibility. The Rockefeller transformation. This helps explain another important aspect of the Rockefeller story. John D. Rockefeller created extraordinary wealth through Standard Oil, but the Rockefeller legacy did not remain simply a pile of money, waiting to be divided. Large portions were converted into institutions, philanthropic organizations, educational initiatives, medical research, public health efforts. The Rockefeller Foundation was established in 1913 and became one of the major philanthropic institutions of the 20th century. The fortune changed form. And that matters, because wealth stored only for consumption gradually fragments. But wealth transformed into institutions can continue pursuing a mission after the founder is dead. The money stops being only personal. It becomes structural. Berkshire Hathaway. The value of reputation now. Consider Berkshire Hathaway. Its long association with Warren Buffett provides another lesson. Buffett repeatedly emphasized the importance of reputation. Money can sometimes be recovered. Trust is harder. A company can survive a bad quarter. It may survive a bad investment. But repeated violations of trust can destroy something much more valuable than accounting profits. Reputation. And reputation is a form of inherited capital. A child inherits a family name. A chief executive inherits a corporate name. A political leader inherits national institutions. Each receives trust accumulated by people who came before. The question is whether they add to that trust or withdraw from it. Every dishonest decision is a withdrawal. Every promise kept is a deposit. Over decades, those decisions become culture, and culture becomes legacy. Succession is not a ceremony. Many organizations misunderstand succession. They imagine it as the moment when one leader leaves and another takes the chair. But real succession begins years earlier. It begins when knowledge starts moving. When younger people receive responsibility, when they are allowed to fail on manageable problems, when they learn how decisions are made, when they understand not merely the rules, but the reasons behind the rules. Because there is a major difference between teaching someone what to do and teaching them how to think. Rules work while conditions remain unchanged. Judgment works when conditions change, and conditions always change. This is why the strongest inheritance is not a manual, it is judgment. Why overprotection can destroy succession. This creates a difficult challenge for successful parents and founders. They naturally want to protect the next generation. They remember suffering. They remember uncertainty. They remember humiliation. And they think, my children should never experience what I experienced. The intention is understandable, but taken too far. Protection can remove the experiences required to develop competence. A child never allowed to make decisions does not suddenly become a great decision maker at 40. A successor never allowed to fail does not magically develop judgment when the founder dies. A young leader never given responsibility cannot suddenly carry an institution when crisis arrives. Capability requires practice. The solution is not unnecessary suffering. The solution is meaningful responsibility. Give people challenges appropriate to their stage. Let them solve problems. Let consequences teach. Let experience create confidence. Protection should help people grow until they can stand. It should not prevent them from ever learning how to stand. The fourth generation, this brings us to something the phrase three-generation curse often hides. There can be a fourth generation, and a fifth, and a 10th. The cycle can be broken, but only if later generations stop seeing themselves merely as descendants. They must become founders again, not necessarily founders of a new company, founders of a new chapter. Every generation must create something. Perhaps the first generation builds the company. The second professionalizes it. The third takes it into new markets. The fourth develops new technology. The fifth transforms the family wealth into institutions. Each generation adds something. That is how inheritance remains alive. A legacy begins dying when descendants believe their job is simply to preserve the museum. Living things cannot merely be preserved. They must grow. The founder mindset must be recreated. This may be the greatest secret of the survivors. They somehow recreate the founder mentality without recreating the founder's poverty. They create challenge without manufacturing misery, responsibility without unnecessary suffering, ambition without desperation, humility without humiliation. They tell the next generation you are fortunate. But fortune does not make you superior. You inherited opportunity. Now develop competence. You inherited a name. Now become worthy of it. You inherited resources. Now create something with them. That is how the cycle changes. The first generation builds. The second generation does not merely preserve. It builds again. The third does not merely inherit. It builds again. Every generation becomes, in some sense, a first generation. The 7 principles of survival across the stories we have examined. Several principles emerge. The survivors remember where they came from, but they do not become prisoners of nostalgia. They transfer knowledge, but they also develop judgment. They preserve values, but they adapt methods. They protect reputation, but they remain willing to take intelligent risks. They create institutions stronger than individuals. They give the next generation responsibility before giving them control. And above all, they continue creating. Because preservation alone is not enough. The world changes, competitors change, technology changes, societies change. A legacy does not adapt, becomes a monument. And monuments do not grow. The real opposite of a decline, the opposite of decline is not stability, it is renewal. That distinction matters. A family trying only to remain exactly as it was will eventually become irrelevant. A company trying only to protect yesterday's success will eventually be overtaken. A civilization obsessed only with its past may fail to prepare for its future. Survival requires renewal, again and again and again. This is why the 3-generation curse is not really about generations. It is about renewal. The founder is forced to renew because there is nothing to inherit. The descendant must choose renewal even when there is everything to inherit. That is harder, and perhaps that is why so many fail. Final lesson: the strongest legacy is not a fortune so large that nobody can spend it. It is not a company so powerful that nobody can defeat it. It is not a family name so famous that everybody respects it. Those things can disappear. The strongest legacy is a culture capable of producing capable people again and again. People who can think. People who can adapt, people who can create, people who understand that inheritance is not permission to stop building. The first generation may light the fire, but a fire survives only when someone continues feeding it. That is the secret of the survivors. They do not worship the flame their ancestors created. They learn how to make fire. And when one generation disappears, the next generation knows exactly what to do. Chapter 10: The Immortal Empire. Why ideas, values, and knowledge can survive long after wealth, power, and bloodlines disappear. Every empire eventually meets an enemy it cannot defeat. Not another army, not another king, not another company, not another family. Time is patient. It does not need to attack. It simply waits. The palace that once represented absolute power becomes a ruin. The currency that once purchased armies becomes an artifact behind glass. The company that once dominated an industry becomes a case study. The family name that once opened every door slowly disappears from public memory. And eventually even the people who seemed impossible to forget become names in books. This is the final test of legacy, not what survives for 10 years, not what survives for 50, but what survives when the founder, the children, the grandchildren, the buildings, and perhaps even the civilization itself are gone. Because if we follow the three-generation problem to its deepest conclusion, we discover something surprising. Perhaps the greatest legacy is not something you can own at all. Perhaps the things that survive longest are the things that cannot be locked inside a vault. Ideas, knowledge, values, methods, stories, institutions, ways of thinking. These can survive the death of the person who created them. And sometimes, they can survive the empire itself. Socrates, the man left almost nothing more than 2,400 years ago. Socrates walked through Athens asking questions. He commanded no army. He ruled no kingdom. He founded no corporation. He accumulated no enormous fortune. And perhaps most remarkably, he left us no philosophical books written by his own hand. Much of what we know about him comes through others, especially his student Plato. Think about that. A man without an empire, without great wealth, without written works of his own, still influences how people think more than 2,000 years after his death. Why? Because Socrates discovered something more durable than possession. He developed a way of questioning. What do you believe? Why do you believe it? How do you know? What if you are wrong? Those questions can survive without Socrates. Once transferred into another mind, they no longer require their creator. That is the extraordinary power of ideas. A palace requires maintenance, a fortune requires management, an army requires resources. But an idea can reproduce itself inside another human being. Socrates died. The question survived. Confucius, when a teacher outlives dynasties, now travel east. Centuries before the Roman Empire reached its height, Confucius taught about character, education, family responsibility, leadership, and social order. He did not become emperor. He did not conquer China. He did not create a dynasty carrying his bloodline across the continent. Yet dynasties rose and fell while his influence continued. That distinction is extraordinary. Kings who possessed armies disappeared. Confucius possessed ideas. The armies vanished. The ideas remained. His teachings were interpreted, debated, modified, institutionalized, criticized, and revived across centuries. That is what living legacies do. They do not remain frozen. They enter conversation with future generations. This gives us another principle. A legacy survives longer when future generations can use it, not merely admire it. The difference between a monument and a tool. A monument tells future generations, look at what we accomplished. A tool tells future generations, here is something you can use. The distinction matters. A successful person may leave behind an enormous house. Eventually someone else owns it. A thinker leaves behind a useful idea. Millions of people may inherit it simultaneously. Physical inheritance divides. If 5 children inherit land, the land may need to be divided. If 5 children inherit knowledge, each can possess the whole thing, and each can pass it forward again. Ideas have a strange property. Sharing them does not necessarily reduce them. It can multiply them. This is why knowledge can become one of humanity's most powerful forms of inheritance. Newton, standing on what others built. Consider Isaac Newton. Newton did not create knowledge from nothing. No great thinker does. He inherited mathematics, astronomy, earlier discoveries, questions raised by generations before him. He then added his contribution. Future scientists inherited his work. They questioned it, extended it, corrected parts of it, built beyond it. This is perhaps the healthiest form of legacy. Not, my descendants must preserve everything exactly as I left it, but take what I discovered and go further. That is how civilization advances. One generation does not finish the work. It moves the boundary, then hands the problem forward. Einstein. When the next generation challenges the previous one centuries after Newton, Albert Einstein helped transform humanity's understanding of space, time, gravity, and energy. But Einstein's achievement did not require destroying Newton's legacy. Newtonian physics remained enormously useful within its domain. Einstein expanded the framework. This teaches us something important about inheritance. Respecting previous generations does not mean refusing to surpass them. In fact, the greatest tribute to a builder may be to continue building beyond them. A father should not need his son to remain beneath him. A teacher should not fear a student becoming better. A founder should not design an organization that can never improve upon the founder's decisions. If the next generation cannot surpass you, perhaps you did not truly prepare them. The danger of turning legacy into worship. There is a dark side to legacy. Sometimes descendants become so obsessed with preserving the founder that they stop thinking. The founder's methods become sacred. Their decisions become unquestionable. Their words become permanent instructions for circumstances they never experienced. Then legacy becomes a prison. The founder wanted to solve problems. The descendants begin protecting the founder's solutions even after the problems have changed. This is how living ideas become dead traditions. The solution is not disrespect, it is understanding. Ask, what principle was the founder protecting? What problem were they solving? What would that principle require today? Preserve the wisdom. Reconsider the method. Bloodline is not enough. This brings us back to the original question. How many generations does it take for an empire or legacy to disappear? There is no universal number. Some fortunes fragment quickly. Some political regimes collapse within one succession. Some businesses disappear after the founder. Some dynasties last centuries. Some ideas survive millennia. The number of generations matters less than the mechanism of transmission. If a legacy depends only on blood, it is fragile. If it depends only on wealth, it is vulnerable. If it depends only on one personality, it may die with that personality. But when a legacy becomes knowledge, institutions, culture, values, useful ideas, it can escape the limits of bloodline. The descendants no longer need to carry the founder's surname. Humanity itself becomes the heir, the parent which you will never enter. A history book. This principle is not reserved for philosophers and emperors. Most people will never have statues built in their honor. Most will never control great companies. Most will never rule nations. But almost everyone can influence another human being. And that may be enough. A father teaches his child discipline. That child becomes a teacher. The teacher influences hundreds of students. Some of those students raise families differently because of what they learned. The original father may be forgotten. His name may disappear. His photograph may eventually be lost. Yet something he taught continues moving through people he never met. Is that legacy dead, or has it become something deeper? Perhaps being remembered is not the highest form of legacy. Perhaps the highest form is continuing to matter after people forget who started it. The difference between fame and legacy. Fame asks, do people remember my name? Legacy asks, does something valuable continue because I lived? These are not the same. A famous person can leave little behind. An unknown person can influence generations. This changes the entire meaning of success. Because if legacy requires fame, very few people can achieve it. But if legacy means transmitting value, every human being has the opportunity. What should the third generation actually inherit? Now we can answer the question at the center of this documentary. What should the third generation inherit? Not merely the founder's money. Not merely the founder's company, not merely the founder's property, not even merely the founder's rules. They should inherit the founder's capacity to think, the courage to adapt, the discipline to create, the humility to learn, the responsibility to serve, and permission to build something the founder never imagined. That is how legacy escapes the three-generation curse. Every generation must become a founder. Perhaps we have been looking at generations incorrectly. We imagine the first generation builds, the second maintains, the third inherits. But the strongest legacy follows another pattern. The first generation builds, the second generation builds upon it, the third generation builds beyond it. The fourth generation does the same. Every generation becomes a founder of something, not from nothing, but from what it received. That is the difference between inheritance and evolution. Inheritance says, protect what I gave you. Evolution says, use what I gave you to become capable of facing a world I cannot predict. The second is much more powerful, because no founder can predict the future. The world your grandchildren inherit will contain problems you cannot imagine, technologies you never used, competitors you never faced, social conditions you never experienced. You cannot give them every answer. You can give them something better, the ability to find answers. The final law of legacy, and so we arrive at the deepest lesson. You cannot guarantee that your wealth will survive. You cannot guarantee that your company will survive. You cannot guarantee that your country will remain powerful. You cannot even guarantee that your name will be remembered. But you can increase the probability that what mattered about your life continues by teaching, by building institutions, by developing people, by recording knowledge, by creating systems, by transmitting values, by giving the next generation responsibility, and by allowing them to become something greater than you. The strongest legacy does not demand immortality for the founder. It makes the founder unnecessary. The three-generation curse reconsidered. The first generation does not become great merely because it suffered. The second does not become weak merely because it inherited. The third is not doomed merely because it was born into comfort. That would be too simple. The real pattern is deeper. Every generation receives an environment, and every environment creates a different challenge. The founder must overcome scarcity. The successor must overcome dependency. The prosperous generation must overcome complacency. The powerful generation must overcome arrogance. And every generation must overcome the temptation to believe that yesterday's success guarantees tomorrow's survival. There is no permanent victory. There is only renewal. Final conclusion. Every generations must answer one day. Everything you own will belong to someone else's house. Your land, your money, your position, your possessions. Eventually, even your name may become difficult to remember. This is not pessimism. It is the natural condition of human life. The question is not whether you can defeat time. You cannot. The question is whether you can place something valuable into the future before time takes you. The founder creates the opportunity. The next generation receives the responsibility. And every generation after that faces the same decision: consume or create, protect or improve, worship the past or build the future. Empires disappear when descendants inherit power but forget purpose. Fortunes disappear when descendants inherit money but forget discipline. Companies disappear when successors inherit products but forget innovation. And legacies disappear when people inherit answers but forget how to think. But the cycle can be broken. Teach the principles, transfer responsibility, build institutions, preserve the story, allow adaptation, create people who can create again. Because the greatest inheritance is not something your descendants can spend. It is something they can use to rebuild after everything else has disappeared. Buildings become ruins. Fortunes change hands, companies disappear, dynasties end, even civilizations transform. But knowledge can travel, values can travel, ideas can travel, character can travel. From parent to child, from teacher to student, from founder to successor, from one century into another. And perhaps that is the closest human beings ever come to immortality. Not living forever, but creating something valuable enough that life continues carrying it forward. So when you think about legacy, do not ask only, what will I leave behind? Ask something harder. What kind of people will be capable of carrying it? Because ultimately, the first generation may build the empire, but the generations that follow decide whether it becomes a dynasty, a ruin, or an idea that refuses to die. That is the three-generation curse, and that is how it is broken.